I don't know who let you sit here all day, but we don't do whatever this is.
Bradford Voss's voice echoed across the marble lobby, stopping every person in the room cold. He didn't lower his volume. He wanted the entire floor to hear. He looked down at the black woman in the plain charcoal coat, his face twisted in unvarnished contempt.
Meridian Stoneworth does not send people who look like people who show up off the street. The investors we work with don't wait in lobbies like delivery temps.
He pointed toward the exit.
Collect your little bag and go back to the street where you belong. Courtney, call security. Escort this woman out before she bothers our actual clients.
A heavy, electric silence fell. Everyone watched, waiting for the woman to shrink, to apologize, to scurry away in humiliation. Instead, Adaora Okonkwo-Bell calmly stood up. She didn't yell. She didn't flinch. She simply reached into her worn leather portfolio and pulled out a single sheet of heavy cream paper, a letter of intent for a $600 million development project. She had come to hand this man the absolute largest deal of his career. And he had just ordered security to throw her out on the pavement. He had no idea that the price tag for his ordinary cruelty was about to cost him everything he had spent 40 years building. But before I show you how far this man was about to fall, I need to take you back to 9 o'clock that morning, 5 hours before this moment, when Adaora Okonkwo-Bell first walked through the front doors of Hargrove Voss Partners. Because to understand what just happened in that lobby, you have to understand who this woman really was, what she came there to do, and exactly how a building full of people spent an entire day teaching her that she was nobody. Stay with me. This story is going somewhere you will not forget. Let me tell you about Adaora. Her full name was Adaora Okonkwo-Bell. And the people who knew the real money in this country knew that name the way mechanics know the sound of a good engine. Not loud, not flashy, just unmistakable once you'd heard it. She was 47 years old, and she had built Meridian Stoneworth Capital from a single rented desk into one of the largest privately held infrastructure investment funds on the eastern seaboard. Roads, bridges, water systems, affordable housing that didn't fall apart in 10 years. The unglamorous bones of cities. While other funds chased apps and crypto and whatever was trending that quarter, Adaora bought the things people stood on and drove over and drank from. Concrete and steel and clean pipe. Things that lasted, she was worth. On the morning this story takes place, just over $2 billion. Not that she ever said the number out loud. She found the saying of it vulgar. She could have arrived at Hargrove Voss Partners in a way that announced itself a motorcad, a team of advisors in matching suits, a publicist walking 3 steps ahead to clear the path and make sure everyone knew exactly who was coming. Funds half her size traveled like visiting royalty. That was the industry. The bigger the money, the bigger the show. But Adaora found the show exhausting. And more than that, she found it useful to be underestimated. You learned the truth about people in the gap between what they thought you were and what you actually were. You learned everything. So, she drove herself. A clean dark sedan. Nothing exotic. She wore good clothes cut simply. The kind that whispered to people who knew fabric and said nothing at all to people who didn't. She carried her father's portfolio and her father's fountain pen. And she walked into buildings the way anyone walks into a building, through the front door, on her own 2 feet. The fountain pen deserves its own moment. because Adaora carried it everywhere. And the people who underestimated her never once thought to wonder why a woman in a plain coat would keep a 50-year-old pen in a worn leather case as though it were made of bone china. It had belonged to her father, Adaora Okonkwo. He had come to this country at 23 with a single suitcase, and the kind of hope that customs forms have no box for. He was a bricklayer, a mason. He had hands like cured leather and a back that gave out 15 years before it should have. And he laid the brick, straight and plumb and perfect, prouder of a clean mortar joint than most men are of anything they will ever do. For office towers and bank lobbies and private clubs that would not have let him through the front door to use the restroom. He built the rooms that excluded him. He did it for 31 years. The pen had been a gift to himself, the only extravagant thing he ever bought, purchased, the week he became a citizen. He used it to sign Adaora's report cards. He used it to sign the lease on the first house he ever owned. A narrow place with a leaning porch in a neighborhood. The banks had written off and starved of every dollar. A house he was only able to buy at all because a city had decided, decades earlier, that people like him could live here and not there. And when his back finally failed him for good and the work dried up and the money got thin, he used that same pen to write Adaora, who was away at university on a scholarship. A single line on the back of a postcard, in his careful upright hand. It said, "Build the rooms they cannot keep you out of." He died before she made her first million. He never saw any of it. The pen was the only piece of him she had left. And she kept it in his portfolio. And she carried both into every building she ever walked into. Because she had built her entire life on the instruction written on that postcard. And she had never once forgotten where the instruction came from. So when she sat in the lobby of Hargrove Voss Partners that morning with the portfolio across her knees, she was not, as the people there assumed, a nobody waiting for someone to notice her. She was the daughter of a man who had laid the brick of 100 rooms exactly like this one and been thrown out of every single one. And she had come, on this particular morning, to walk into a room they could not keep her out of and to use it to give 40 acres back to the very people they had thrown out alongside her father. One generation at a time, because here is why she came. Hargrove Voss Partners was the most celebrated architecture and development firm in the Southeast. 40 years of awards. Glass towers, with their fingerprints on them, in 9 states. And right now, they were the lead design firm being considered for the Eastside Commons project. A $600 million redevelopment of 40 acres in a part of Atlanta that had been left to rot for 2 generations. 40 acres, where Adaora's own grandmother had once owned a corner grocery. Before the highway came through, and a city decided her block was in the way, Adaora had quietly assembled the capital to fund the entire thing, $600 million. Hers to direct, and she had a condition that no one at Hargrove Voss yet understood. She would not simply write the check and walk away. She intended to reshape the deal. Affordable units, protected for 40 years, instead of 15, local hiring guarantees, a clause that gave displaced families the first right of return to the homes built on the land they were pushed off of. She was not a passive checkbook. She was the single most important person who would ever walk through that firm's doors. And she had come, on this morning, to look the firm in the eye before she trusted them with the place her family came from. The meeting was at 9 o'clock. She arrived at 8:45. She would not be seen until almost 2 in the afternoon. This is the story of those 5 hours. And everything they cost? The lobby of Hargrove Voss Partners was designed to make you feel small. That was intentional. A 40-foot ceiling, a wall of water sheeting down black granite, a reception desk carved from a single slab of Italian marble that had cost more than the houses of everyone who cleaned the building combined. And behind that desk sat Courtney Pruitt. Courtney was 26. She had been the firm's front-of-house receptionist for 2 years. And in that time, she had developed a precise and unspoken science for sorting the people who walked through the door. It happened in under 3 seconds. And she was not even fully aware she did it. Shoes, watch, bag, the confidence of the walk, the color of the skin. She slotted each arrival into a category: important, vendor, lost, and she calibrated her warmth accordingly. The way a thermostat clicks on and off. Without thinking about it, Adaora walked in at 8:45. Courtney looked up. Charcoal coat. No logo. Plain bag. Black woman. Alone. No entourage. Click. Vendor. Probably. Or lost. Can I help you? Courtney said. The words were polite. The temperature was not good morning. Adaora said. Her voice low and even and warm. I have a 9 o'clock with Mr. Click. Voss and the East Side Commons team. The name is Adaora Bell. With Meridian Stoneworth. Courtney's eyes flicked to her screen. She typed something. She frowned. Not because there was a problem, but because frowning was easier than processing the mismatch in front of her, the plain coat and the enormous name she didn't recognize. And this is regarding the $600 million project your firm is designing. Adaora said gently, I'm the lead investor. There it was. The flicker. The half-second where Courtney's brain received information that did not match the picture and chose, instinctively, to disbelieve the information rather than update the picture. Because the picture was comfortable, the picture was what she had always been told the world looked like. Money looked a certain way. Power looked a certain way. And it did not look like the woman standing in front of her. Okay, Courtney said. She did not pick up the phone. If you want to have a seat, I'll let someone know you're here. Thank you. Adaora crossed to the waiting area. She sat. She placed her father's portfolio across her knees, folded her hands, and she waited. She was the most important appointment on the firm's calendar that day. The single largest source of capital the firm had ever been in a room with. And Courtney Pruitt did not pick up the phone. Instead, she typed a message to a junior coordinator. It said, walk in, claiming to be an investor for East Side. No appointment I can find. Doesn't look legit. Can someone deal when you get a sec? No appointment I can find. The appointment was right there in the system. Courtney simply hadn't believed it enough to read it twice. That message would surface later, in a deposition, printed on a page, read aloud, in a very quiet room. Doesn't look legit. 4 words that would help end 3 careers. But Courtney didn't know that yet. She turned back to her screen. The matter resolved in her mind. And Adaora sat in the waiting area. And the clock on the wall said 8:51. By 9:30. Adaora had watched the lobby breathe. She was good at watching. She had built a fortune on watching, on seeing what a place did when it thought no one important was paying attention. And what Hargrove Voss did, In the gap where it thought she was, nobody told her everything. At 9:05, a man in a navy suit walked in. White, early 50s. A watch she recognized, and a tan she recognized, and the particular loose confidence of someone who had never once in his life been asked to prove he belonged anywhere. Courtney was on her feet before he reached the desk. "Mr. Castellano, so good to see you. Can I get you a coffee espresso? The way you like it. They're expecting you upstairs. Go right up. You know the way." The man smiled, said something that made Courtney laugh, and walked to the elevator without breaking stride. "No sign in. No wait. No proof of anything." Adaora watched. She filed it away. At 9:40, 2 more visitors arrived. White, well-dressed, same warmth, same coffee, same. Go right up. The desk was a faucet, and Adaora watched it run hot for some and ice-cold for others. And the pattern was not subtle, and it was not an accident. And after a while, it was not even surprising. It was just sad, in the specific, exhausting way that Adaora had found things sad for 47 years. At 10:00, a woman in housekeeping moved through the lobby, emptying bins. She was black, in her 60s, and she moved the way people move when they have learned to take up as little space as possible. When she reached the waiting area, she glanced at Adaora, and something passed between them. A recognition, brief and complete. The kind that needs no words. The woman gave a small nod. Adaora nodded back. Long wait. "Baby," the woman said quietly. Almost too quiet to hear. "Looks that way." Adaora said, The woman straightened the magazines on the table that no one had touched. "They got 2 speeds here. You'll see." And she moved on with her cart. And Adaora watched her go. And she thought about her father. And she opened the portfolio on her knees, just to look at his pen for a moment before closing it again. At 10:20, Courtney went to lunch. A different coordinator came down. A young man named Devon, who looked at the waiting area, saw Adaora, checked something on a tablet, and said, "Are you being helped? I'm waiting for the 9:00 with Mr. Cack." "Vos?" Adaora said. "East Side Commons." "Oh." Devon frowned at his tablet. "I don't. Let me check on that for you." He disappeared. He did not come back. Somewhere in the long stretch between 11 and noon, a delivery arrived. An enormous arrangement of white orchids for a partner's anniversary. The stems alone, worth more than the housekeeper made in a week. Courtney, back from lunch by then, signed for it with a flourish and made the delivery man laugh, and tipped him from the petty cash drawer and told him to come back any time. The whole transaction took 90 seconds, and it contained more genuine human warmth than anything that had been directed at Adaora in 3 hours. Adaora watched a vase of flowers receive better treatment than she had, and she did not even find it ironic anymore. She found it instructive. This was simply the data. This was simply how the place worked, when it thought no one important was counting, and she had counted everything. By noon, she could have told you the exact number of white visitors who had been waved up without signing in. 11. The exact number who had been offered coffee. 9. The exact number of times she herself had been addressed by a human being who worked in that building des fous. 2 of them by people apologizing for the 5th hour of her wait. She held the numbers, the way her father had held a level against a wall, patiently, without drama, reading the truth the surface was trying to hide. Somewhere in the 4th hour, sitting very still with her cold tea beside her, Adaora let her mind go where it went when she was tired, which was back to her father. She thought about the years he came home from the job sites, with mortar dust ground so deep into the creases of his knuckles that no amount of washing got it fully out. So that even at church on Sundays, in his one good suit, his hands looked like they belonged to the work. She thought about how he never once complained about being thrown out of the buildings he built. Not because it didn't wound him. She understood now. But because complaining was a luxury he could not afford, a door that was also closed to him, he had simply absorbed it, the way the men of his generation absorbed it, and put it down somewhere deep, and gone back the next morning and laid more brick. Straight and plumb and perfect, for people who would never know his name. And she thought, I can afford it. That was the whole inheritance. In the end, not the money. The money was just the tool. The inheritance was that she had been given by his absorbing and his silence and his perfect joints, the rare and expensive ability to not absorb it, to sit in this lobby and let it be made fully visible, and then make it cost something her father had spent his whole life paying, so that one day someone with his blood could sit exactly here and refuse to disappear quietly. The least she could do, she thought, was sit very still and stay very calm, and make absolutely sure that when it finally came, it counted for everyone. It could possibly count for, not just for her. So she waited, and she stayed calm, and the clock moved toward 2. Now let me tell you about Bradford Voss. Because you should understand the man before he opens his mouth. Bradford was 63. He was a named partner, the Voss, in Hargrove Voss. And he had built the firm's reputation, alongside his late mentor, Gerald Hargrove, over 4 decades. He was genuinely talented. That part was real. He had designed buildings that mattered, that won awards, that made the skyline of a dozen cities a little more worth looking at. He was not a stupid man, and he was not, in the way he thought of himself, a cruel one. What Bradford was certain of the order of things, certain that the world had a shape, and that he sat near the top of that shape because he had earned it, and that the shape was fundamentally fair because it had been good to him. He had never had to question it. Questioning it would have required him to look at the help in his own building, the cleaners, the cooks, the security guards, almost all of them, black or brown, and ask why the shape had put them at the bottom and kept them there. And Bradford did not look at the help. Looking at the help was, to Bradford, like looking at the plumbing. You only noticed it when it failed. He had to tell. The way these men always do. When he was uncomfortable. When something in a room did not fit his sense of how things should be. He would touch the heavy gold signet ring on his right hand, turning it slowly with his thumb. He had done it for years. He did it without knowing he did it. By the end of this day, he would do it so hard, the skin underneath would go raw. There was a story he liked to tell at dinners about how he had started with nothing. It wasn't true. Exactly. His father had owned a hardware business and paid for his architecture degree in full, But Bradford had told the nothing story so many times that he had come to believe it. And believing it had done something poisonous to him over the decades. Because if he had built everything from nothing, by his own hand, then everyone who hadn't built everything must simply not have his hand. His grit, his vision, the people cleaning his building, cooking in his cafe, guarding his door. By the logic of the story he told himself, they were at the bottom, because the bottom was where their effort had landed them. It never once occurred to Bradford that the man who emptied his trash might have laid brick for 31 years, with hands like cured leather, and still been kept out of every room he built. The story he told about himself required that the world be fair. And so, for Bradford, the world was fair. It had to be. The alternative was unbearable. Because the alternative meant looking at his own success and seeing, threaded all through it, 1,000 doors that had opened for him and stayed shut for better men. He did not look. Looking was the one thing Bradford Voss had never, in 63 years, made himself do. It was nearly 1 o'clock by the time word of the woman in the lobby finally reached him. And by the time it did, the morning was almost gone. The information reached him filtered through 3 people, and Courtney's original framing. Some walk-in says she's an investor. Doesn't seem legit. By the time it got to Bradford, it had curdled into something he could dismiss without effort. We're not seeing walk-ins today, he told the coordinator. We've got the East Side reviews back to back. If she's legitimate, she can email and we'll find time next month. Tell her we're in meetings. So the message went back down the chain. Mr. Voss is in meetings all day. If you'd like to email to schedule, here's the address. And the young coordinator delivered it to Adaora with the apologetic half-smile of someone who suspects, somewhere underneath, that what they are doing is wrong, but who is far too low on the ladder to say so. Adaora took it in. She nodded slowly. All day. She repeated, Yeah, I'm sorry. He's really booked. I understand. She said. She did not move. I'll wait. The coordinator blinked. It might be hours. It could be the whole day. That's all right. Adaora said, settling her hands again. On the portfolio. I have time, and here is the thing you need to understand about that moment. The thing the whole story turns on. Adaora was not waiting because she had to. She had 10 other firms that would have cleared a runway for her capital with a single phone call. She was waiting because she had decided, somewhere around hour 2, that she was no longer evaluating whether to invest $600 million with Hargrove Voss Partners. She was now documenting exactly how this firm treated a black woman it had decided was nobody. She was, in the calmest and most devastating way imaginable, building a case. And there was one person in that building who saw it. Her name was Priya Okafor, and she was a 29-year-old junior associate architect. 2 years out of her master's, 3 years into a career, she was already starting to suspect would never let someone like her past a certain invisible line. Priya was sharp. She had graduated top of her class. She did the late nights and the impossible deadlines. And she watched, again and again, as the credit for her drawings traveled up the org chart and landed on the desks of men who had been at home asleep when the work was done. Priya had been crossing the lobby at 9:15, on her way to a meeting. When she first saw the woman in the charcoal coat, she noticed her the way you notice anyone waiting. Briefly, without weight. But Priya crossed that lobby 6 more times over the next 4 hours. And each time, the woman was still there, still straight-backed, still patient, still being walked past by people who lit up for every white visitor and went cold for her. There was a specific reason Priya couldn't let it go. And the reason had a name. And the name was a project called Halverson Tower that had nearly broken her the year before. She had done the work, all of it. 3 months of 18-hour days, sleeping under her desk twice a week, solving a structural problem on the cantilevered upper floors that 2 senior architects had declared unsolvable. The drawings were hers. The breakthrough was hers. And when the project won a regional design award, Priya had sat in the back of the banquet hall in a dress she had bought for the occasion and watched a man named Garrett, a man who had been on a ski trip in Colorado during the worst 2 weeks of that deadline, walk up to the podium and accept it. He thanked the team. He said we a lot. He did not say her name. Afterward, at the bar, he clapped her on the shoulder and told her she had a real future at the firm if she kept her head down and put in the work. And Priya had smiled and said thank you and gone home and sat in her car in the parking garage for 40 minutes. Not crying, just sitting, doing the same quiet arithmetic that every sharp young person who looks like her eventually has to do. The arithmetic of how much of yourself you can pour into a place that has already decided your name belongs in the we and never on the plaque. So when Priya watched a black woman get sorted into nobody and walked past for 4 hours by a building full of people who would have lit up for her instantly if she had been white, it landed somewhere very specific in Priya. It landed on the bruise. She knew that sorting. She had been sorted. By the 5th crossing, something had started to turn over in her stomach. By the 6th, she had stopped pretending she didn't see it. At 11:40, she walked over to the waiting area, knelt slightly, so she wasn't standing over the seated woman, and said quietly, "Ma'am, can I get you some water or a coffee? You've been waiting a really long time." And I don't think that's right. It was a small thing. It was the only decent thing anyone in that building had said to Adaora in nearly 3 hours. Adaora looked up at her. Really looked the way she had looked at the housekeeper. The way you look at someone when you are deciding something about them. And she said, "Water would be very kind." "Thank you, of course." Priya hesitated. "Can I ask who you're here to see? Maybe I can help move it along." "Bradford Voss," Adaora said. And her voice didn't change. "And the East Side Commons team? I've had a 9 o'clock since this morning." Priya went very still. She didn't say anything. She didn't gasp or widen her eyes or do any of the things that would have given it away. But somewhere behind her composed face, a number had just clicked into place, and the number was enormous. And the wrongness of what she had been watching all morning suddenly had a scale to it that made her slightly sick. "I'll get your water," Priya said carefully. "And I'm going to make sure someone tells Mr. Voss you're still here." She walked back toward the elevators. Halfway there, almost without deciding to, she reached into her pocket and turned her phone to record. Just audio. Just in case. She didn't fully know why. She would later say she didn't fully know why for a long time. Only that some instinct, sharpened by 3 years of watching credit and dignity get redistributed away from people who looked like her, told her that today she should not look away, and she should not trust her memory to be believed. She had a feeling she was about to witness something. She had no idea, And that brings us back to where we started. It was 1:45 when Bradford Voss came downstairs. He didn't come down for Adaora. He came down because the Castellano meeting had wrapped early, and he wanted to walk his guest to the door personally. The kind of warm, expansive send-off he gave to people he had already decided mattered. He strode across the lobby with Mr. Cland, Castellano, laughing at something, his hand on the man's shoulder. The very picture of a host at the height of his powers, and as he turned from the door, having waved Castellano off, Bradford Voss finally, fully, registered the woman who had been sitting in his lobby for 5 hours. She had stood up. She was walking toward him, unhurried, the worn leather portfolio under her arm. "Mr. Voss," she said, "my name is Adaora Bell. I've had an appointment with you since 9 o'clock this morning, regarding East Side Commons. I've waited 5 hours. I think you and I should talk now." And this is where Bradford Voss made the choice that ended his career. He could have been confused. He could have been embarrassed. He could have said, "I'm so sorry. There's clearly been a terrible mistake. Please, come up." Any of those would have saved him. The information was right there. The plain coat and the steady voice, and the words East Side Commons should have triggered something, some flicker of weight. But Bradford was tired, and he was full of the easy warmth of a good meeting with a man he respected. And he looked at the black woman in the unremarkable coat walking toward him, uninvited. And every certainty he had ever carried about the shape of the world told him exactly what she was. A problem, a nobody. Someone who didn't understand her place and had to be put back in it. "I don't know who let you sit here all day, but we don't do whatever this is." His voice echoed across the marble lobby, stopping every person in the room cold. He didn't lower his volume. He wanted the entire floor to hear. Meridian Stoneworth does not send people who look like people who show up off the street. The investors we work with don't wait in lobbies like delivery temps. He pointed toward the exit. "Collect your little bag and go back to the street where you belong. Courtney, call security. Escort this woman out before she bothers our actual clients. People who look like..." He had almost said it. Everyone in that lobby heard the shape of the words he swallowed, and a heavy, electric silence fell. The specific, electric silence of a room full of people who all understood at the same instant that they had just watched a line get crossed. The housekeeper, by the wall, had stopped moving her cart entirely. Devin, the coordinator who had promised to check and never come back, stood frozen by the elevator with a stack of folders against his chest. 2 other associates, waiting for the elevator, had both, without quite meaning to, taken half a step back, the way people step back from a fire that has suddenly grown. And Priya stood 20 feet away with a glass of water in one hand and her phone recording silently in her pocket. And she felt her own heartbeat in her ears. And she understood that whatever was about to happen, she was going to be a witness to it. And she made the decision, in that second, that she was not going to look away, no matter what it cost her. Adaora did not flinch. She did not raise her voice. She looked at Bradford Voss for a long moment. The way you look at a building, you are deciding whether to condemn. And then she said something very quietly. "Say that again." I said, "The door is..." "No." Her voice stayed soft, and it cut clean through the marble. "Say the part you stopped yourself from saying. People who look like..." "Finish it." I'd like everyone here to hear you finish it. Bradford's jaw tightened. His thumb found the gold ring and began to turn it. For a moment, something flickered behind his eyes. Some last, distant alarme bell. Some buried instinct that this was wrong. That a sensible man would stop here, would apologize, would walk it back. He could have stopped. The off-ramp was right there, lit and open. All he had to do was say, "I'm sorry. I misspoke." But Bradford had spent 63 years never once making himself look. And a man who has trained that long at not seeing cannot suddenly see just because a moment demands it. The certainty was older than the alarm bell. The certainty won, the way it always had. "I don't have time for this," he said. "Courtney, call security. Have them escort this woman out." And Courtney, God help her, picked up the phone. It is worth pausing on Courtney's hand on that phone, because Courtney was not a monster. And that is exactly the point. She was 26. She had student loans and a sick mother in Macon. And she was, in most rooms, on most days, a perfectly kind person. She would have told you, sincerely, that she did not have a racist bone in her body. And she picked up the phone to have security remove a black woman from a lobby that woman had every right to sit in. And she did it almost without thinking. The way she did everything, almost without thinking. Because the building had spent 2 years teaching her exactly how to sort people and exactly whose side to take, and rewarding her for learning the lesson. And Courtney had been an excellent student. The cruelty in that lobby did not require a single cruel person. It only required a system that had taught ordinary people that this was simply how things were done, and a roomful of them willing to keep doing it. Because no one with the power to stop them was watching, except this time. Someone was. Because as Courtney lifted the phone, Adaora Okonkwo-Bell finally reached into her father's portfolio. She did not pull out a phone to call anyone. She did not name drop or threaten. She pulled out a single sheet of heavy cream paper, and she set it down on the marble reception desk. And she turned it so that Bradford Voss could read it right side up. It was a letter of intent. On Meridian Stoneworth letterhead, drafted by a major law firm, naming, in the first paragraph, the project, East Side Commons, Atlanta, Georgia, and the amount, $600 million, and the lead investor, signature, already on the line at the bottom, Adaora Okonkwo-Bell, founder and chief executive officer. Meridian Stoneworth Capital. Bradford read it. His thumb stopped turning the ring. "I came here this morning," Adaora said, and her voice never rose. Not once. That was the terrible elegance of it. To sign that, with your firm. $600 million. The single largest investment your partnership has ever received. I came to do it in person. Because the land you're building on is land my grandmother once owned before a highway took it, and a city decided her block didn't matter. I came to look the people I'd be trusting in the eye. She let that sit. Instead, I sat in your lobby for 5 hours. I watched your receptionist roll out coffee and a smile for every white man who walked through that door. And I watched her decide I was nobody before I finished my own name. I watched 2 of your people promise to check on me and never come back. I received a message that you were in meetings all day and that I could email. And just now, in front of this entire room, you told me to collect my bag and go back to the street where I belonged. And you reached for the word you didn't have the courage to say. And you called security on the woman who came to hand your firm $600 million. The lobby was so quiet, you could hear the water sheeting down the granite wall. So no, Mr. Voss, I won't be needing security. I know the way out. I found it 3 hours ago. I just wanted to see how far you would take it first. She closed the portfolio. She uncapped her father's fountain pen. And right there on the marble, on the back of a Hargrove Voss business card she had been handed that morning, she wrote 3 words and set the card face up on the desk where Bradford could read it. Offer is withdrawn. And she turned to leave. She made it 4 steps before Bradford Voss found his voice. And when he did, it had changed completely. The contempt was gone. In its place was something raw and scrabbling. The sound of a man watching the floor open under 40 years of work. Wait, Mrs. Bell. Please. Adaora. Her name came out of him clumsy and desperate. A word he had refused to learn 5 minutes ago and was now clutching it like a railing. There's been a misunderstanding. An enormous misunderstanding. If you'll just let me. Adaora stopped. She turned halfway back. And for the first time, there was something almost gentle in her face, which was worse for Bradford than anger would have been, because it was the gentleness of someone who has already finished deciding and feels no need to be cruel about it. It isn't a misunderstanding, she said. You understood me perfectly. You looked at me, and you understood me to be worthless. That's not a mistake. Mr. Voss, that's just the truth of how you see made visible. The only mistake was the price tag I happened to be wearing today. And I promise you, the next woman who sits in that lobby won't be carrying $600 million to make you sorry. She'll just be a person, and she'll deserve the coffee, and the smile, and the go right up, exactly as much as Mr. Castellano did. The fact that you can't see that until it costs you is the whole problem. It always was. Please. Bradford's voice cracked. People in the lobby were openly staring now. The partnership, the firm. There are 200 people who work here. Their jobs, the project, those families you talked about, the homes. If this falls through, don't. For the first time, something flickered under Adaora's calm. Not anger, but a deep and ancient weariness. Don't you dare put those families on me. You stood in this lobby 30 seconds ago and didn't spare them a thought. Don't reach for them now that they're useful to you. That's the oldest trick there is. And I've watched men like you run it my whole life. The people at the bottom only become worth protecting the moment they can be used as a shield for the people at the top. She let the silence stretch. Here's what's going to happen, she said, and I want everyone in this room to hear it. Because some of you are going to remember today for the rest of your lives. And I'd like you to remember it accurately. She looked, slowly, around the lobby, at Courtney, frozen with the phone still in her hand, at Devon by the elevator, at the 2 associates, at the housekeeper by the wall, who met her eyes and held them, at Priya, 20 feet away, the glass of water trembling very slightly in her grip. You didn't do anything unusual just now? Mr. Voss. That's the part people always get wrong about these stories. They want the villain to be a monster. Something rare. Something they could never be. You're not rare. What you did to me. Men like you do. to women like me in lobbies exactly like this one 1,000 times a day across this country. And almost none of it ever costs them a thing. Because almost none of the women they do it to are carrying what I'm carrying in this bag. The only thing unusual about today is the size of the check you just spat on. That's all. The cruelty was ordinary. It's the price that's about to be extraordinary. And then she walked out the front door of a building they had tried to throw her out of. And she let it close behind her. And the whole lobby exhaled. Now, let me tell you what happened next. Because what Adaora did over the following 90 days is the part that matters most. And it is not the part you are expecting. She did not destroy Hargrove-Voss partners. That surprised people. Later, when they heard the whole story, she could have. A single phone call would have done it. The capital pulled. The reputation shredded. The project handed to a competitor. The firm hollowed out and the doors closed inside a year. The power to do that sat in her father's portfolio the entire time. And everyone in that lobby had just watched Bradford learn it. But Adaora had not built a fortune on burning things down. She had built it on rebuilding, on bridges and water systems, and the unglamorous bones of places everyone else had given up on. Destruction was easy, and it was cheap, and it changed nothing. The shape that put the housekeeper at the bottom and Bradford at the top, burning down. One firm did not touch that shape. It just relocated it. So she did something harder. But first, let me tell you what it cost Priya. Because Adaora was right about who pays first. Priya brought the recording to the firm's managing partners. That same afternoon, she did not have to. No one knew the recording existed. She could have deleted it, gone home, kept her head down, protected the real future Garrett had promised her if she stayed quiet and grateful. Every instinct that 3 years at Hargrove-Voss had drilled into her screamed to do exactly that. A junior associate does not walk into the partner's suite with audio of a named partner committing what the recording plainly was. A junior associate who does that does not, by the usual logic of these places, have a future at all. She did it anyway. Her hands were shaking so badly, she had to set her phone down on the conference table to play it, because she couldn't hold it steady. She watched the partners' faces change as Bradford's voice filled the room. People who look like, "Call security. The street where you belong." And she watched them understand in real time the size of what had happened in their own lobby while they were upstairs. And she waited, in the silence after the recording ended, to find out whether she had just done the right thing or ended her career. And for several of the longest seconds of her life, she genuinely did not know which. What saved Priya was not the partner's decency, though some of them had some. What saved Priya was the same thing that doomed Bradford. The number. Because 30 minutes after Priya played that recording, Adaora's law firm sent over the formal notice that the $600 million letter of intent had been withdrawn, citing the conduct of the named partner. On the record, in front of witnesses, and suddenly the partners of Hargrove-Voss were not weighing one junior associate's discomfort against one senior partner's pride. They were weighing the survival of the firm against a man who had set it on fire in a lobby. The math was not close. The math is never close. Once the number gets big enough, and that, too, was part of what Adaora wanted everyone to sit with later. Priya did the brave and right thing, but it only worked because it happened to be standing next to 9 zeros. Strip the zeros out, and Priya is just another sharp young woman who spoke up and got managed out for it. She knew that. It was why, Months later, she would tell Adaora she didn't feel brave. She felt lucky. And she hated that the two had to be so tangled together. When the managing committee of Hargrove Voss called Adaora 2 days later to beg, she listened. And then she made an offer that was, in its way, more devastating than withdrawal would have been. She would still fund East Side Commons, the full $600 million. The homes would still get built. The families would still get their first right of return. That her grandmother's corner would still become something her grandmother might have been proud of, but not through Bradford Voss, and not on the firm's old terms. The conditions she set were total. Bradford Voss would step down as named partner and have no role, none, in the project, or any project. Her capital touched, not as a face-saving consultant, not as an emeritus, anything. Courtney Pruitt's conduct and the hiring and training culture that produced it would be examined by an independent firm, not Hargrove Voss's own friendly human resources department, and the contract itself would carry binding requirements written in Adaora's language. Every subcontractor on East Side Commons hired through fair and audited processes, local and minority-owned firms given real access instead of token slots, and a permanent oversight role, funded by Meridian Stoneworth, reporting to no one inside Hargrove Voss, to make sure none of it quietly eroded the moment the cameras left. There was more. And the more was where Adaora's real intelligence showed. She had learned, over 20 years of writing checks this size, that the easy reforms were the ones that looked good in a press release and changed nothing on the ground. A diversity statement on a website, a training session everyone sat through once and forgot, a hotline that routed quietly back to the same people who had caused the problem in the first place. She had watched a dozen firms perform contrition for a season and then revert the moment the attention moved on. Because nothing structural had actually changed. Because the shape was untouched. So her conditions reached, for the shape, the affordable units at East Side Commons would be deed restricted for 40 years. Not the standard 15. Meaning the homes would still be affordable when the children born in them had children of their own. Long after every executive who signed the deal had retired or died, the first right of return clause was written with teeth. Families displaced from those 40 acres by the old highway and the old neglect would be tracked down, contacted, and offered the new homes before a single unit hit the open market, and the oversight role, the permanent one, was given the authority not just to report problems, but to stop work, to freeze the entire $600 million project cold if any subcontractor was found treating its people the way Adaora had been treated in that lobby. Real authority. The kind that costs money to ignore, because Adaora had learned that authority without the power to cost someone. Something is just a suggestion. And suggestions are what buildings grow around, like water around a stone. The managing committee took less than a day to agree to all of it. Bradford fought. At first, then his partners showed him the recording and showed him the letter of intent with the 9 zeros on it and explained to him, slowly, the way you explain a hard thing to a proud man, that there was no version of the firm's future that included both him and the $600 million, and that the partnership had chosen. Bradford Voss signed his own separation papers in the same conference room where he had spent the morning charming Mr. Castellano. He used, the staff noticed, a cheap ballpoint pen. He did not have a beautiful one. He had never thought he would need one. But the part of this story that matters most isn't what happened to Bradford. Men like Bradford are interchangeable. In the end, there is always another one, turning a gold ring with his thumb. Certain of the shape of the world, remove one and the shape grows another. That was the whole lesson Adaora had spent her life learning. You do not fix a rotten thing by firing the person it produced. You fix it by changing what the building grows. So here is what she actually did. When the new oversight role was created, the permanent one, funded by her fund, the one with the authority to stop the project cold, if anyone was being treated the way she had been treated in that lobby. Adaora insisted it not go to some senior outside hire. She wanted someone who already knew, from the inside, exactly how the credit and the dignity in that building flowed uphill and away from the people who earned them. She wanted someone who had been watching it happen, powerless, for years. She wanted Adaora Okonkwo-Bell, who was 29 and a junior associate, and had been told in a dozen quiet ways that her ceiling was already in view. Adaora, who had knelt down and offered a glass of water to a woman everyone else had decided was nobody. Adaora, who had turned on her phone in a hallway, not because she was brave, exactly, but because she had finally gotten tired of letting her own memory be the only witness and had paid for it by not knowing for a sick few days whether handing that recording to her bosses would cost her everything. It did not cost her everything. It gave her a desk on the floor she had been told she would never reach, and a mandate, and a budget, and the authority to make sure the next sharp young architect's drawings carried their own name when they went upstairs. "Why me?" Adaora asked Adaora. The one time they spoke privately. Weeks later, "I didn't do anything. I got you a glass of water. You did 3 things." Adaora said, "You saw me when seeing me was inconvenient. You said something when silence was safer. And you wrote it down because you didn't trust the world to remember it correctly, without proof." She paused. "That's the entire job. Adaora, that's the whole thing. Most people manage one of the 3 on a good day. You did all 3 before lunch." Adaora was quiet for a moment. Then she said the thing she had been carrying since the afternoon she played the recording. "I almost didn't. I want you to know that I sat at my desk for 20 minutes with the file open and my thumb over the delete button. Everything I've been taught here told me to make it go away. The only reason I didn't is that I've been on the other end of it. I had a project once. My work. My name, nowhere near it. And I sat in a parking garage afterward and promised myself something, and I'd been breaking that promise quietly ever since. Because keeping it costs too much. You just happened to be the day I couldn't break it again." Adaora looked at her for a long moment. "Then you understand the most important part better than I could ever teach it." She said, "You're not getting this job because you're noble. Adaora, you're getting it because you know exactly how the credit and the dignity in a building like this flow uphill and away from the people who earn them. Because you watched it happen to you, and it left a mark. I don't want someone who has to imagine the problem. I want someone who's still carrying it. That mark is the qualification. Don't ever let anyone here convince you it's a weakness." So Adaora took the desk on the floor she had been told she would never reach, and the mandate, and the budget, and the authority to stop a $600 million project cold. And the first policy she wrote, the very first one, was a simple rule that every drawing leaving the firm had to carry the name of every person whose hands had shaped it. Junior, senior, on a ski trip, or asleep under a desk. It didn't matter. The names traveled with the work, or the work didn't travel. She named it the Halverson Rule. No one but Priya knew why. She never explained it. She didn't need to. She just sat at her new desk and made sure that what had been done to her would be a little bit harder to do to the next sharp young person who came through those doors with more talent than the building was prepared to admit they had. The housekeeper, her name was Gloria. Adaora made a point of learning it the same afternoon. Before she had even left the building, received something too. Not a grand gesture. Gloria didn't want a grand gesture. And Adaora had the sense to ask first, instead of deciding for her. Which was, Gloria said later, the first time in 19 years that anyone in a position to do something for her had bothered to ask what she actually wanted before doing it. What Gloria wanted was simple. And it was structural. And it told you everything about how the building had treated her. The cleaning staff at Hargrove Voss had been contracted out for 19 years. Kept deliberately at arm's length. No benefits. No names. The firm was required to know. Swapped between buildings like equipment. Treated. In Bradford's own private mental filing system. Like the plumbing. Gloria wanted that to end. She wanted the people who cleaned the building to be employees of the building, with health insurance and paid time off, and names on a directory, and the basic dignity of being known by the people whose trash they emptied. So that's what the contract required. 2 speeds. Gloria had said. That first morning, almost too quiet to hear. They got 2 speeds here. You'll see. Adaora had seen, and the new contract that her $600 million made non-negotiable had exactly one. 6 months later. Adaora Okonkwo-Bell stood on 40 acres of the east side of Atlanta and watched the first foundations get poured. It did not look like much yet. Rebar and gravel and the gray bones of things to come. But Adaora had built a fortune on exactly this, on standing in the unglamorous middle of a thing and being able to see the lasting shape of it before anyone else could. Affordable homes that would still be affordable when the babies being born this year had babies of their own. A corner where her grandmother's grocery had stood. Deeded now into a small public square that the contract said could never be sold. Her father's name on a plaque by the entrance. The man who laid brick for buildings he would never have been allowed to own. Finally attached to something that would outlast everyone who had ever decided he didn't count. She had paid for that plaque herself. Separately. Outside the contract. And she had it cast in bronze, the old way. Because she wanted it to weather slowly and be there in 100 years. It read, in plain letters, in honor of the hands that built the rooms they were kept out of. And beneath that, smaller, Adaora Okonkwo, Mason. And beneath that, smaller still, the single line from the back of a postcard, build the rooms they cannot keep you out of. She had stood in front of it alone for a long time, the morning it was installed, before anyone else arrived, with her father's fountain pen in her hand. And she had not said anything, because there was nothing to say that the bronze didn't already say better. She had just stood there in the early gray light on 40 acres that her family had been thrown off of. And she had let herself feel, for one private minute, the full weight of having come all the way back to build something here that they could never take away again. Gloria had come to the groundbreaking. Adaora had invited her personally, sent a car, made sure she had a seat in the front row and not the back. The two of them stood together for a while as the first foundations were poured. two black women who had met in a marble lobby on the worst and best day of a lot of people's lives. And they didn't talk much, because they didn't need to. At one point, Gloria looked out over the gray bones of the buildings to come and said, quietly, "My mother cleaned houses on the other side of this highway." Houses she could never have set foot in as a guest. She didn't say anything else. Adaora put a hand on her arm. That was the whole conversation. It was enough. Priya stood next to them in a hard hat, holding a tablet, running the oversight program that now covered every subcontractor on the site. She looked, Adaora thought, like someone who had stopped waiting for permission to matter. Bradford Voss was not there. He had retired, quietly, to a house on a lake. His name had come off the door. The firm was just Hargrove Partners now. He had given, through a lawyer, a written apology that Adaora read once and filed without comment. It was careful and polished and hollow, written by a crisis firm, the kind of apology that is sorry for the consequences and never once for the seeing. I deeply regret any actions that may have caused offense. Offense, as though the harm had been a matter of manners. Adaora had met 100 Bradfords. She knew the difference between a man who had changed and a man who had simply learned, late and at great expense, to fear the cost of being seen doing what he had always done. She suspected Bradford was the second kind. She had made her peace with not knowing for certain. It was not, in the end, her job to redeem him. It was her job to make sure the building stopped growing more of him. Courtney Pruitt no longer worked the front desk. The Independent Review had found what reviews like that always find, that the science she ran in those 3 seconds at the door was not a personal failing she had invented alone, but a thing the whole place had quietly taught her was correct, and rewarded her for. For 2 years, she had been let go. Adaora had not pushed for it and had not stood in the way of it. What she had pushed for was the harder thing, that the firm figure out why a 26-year-old had learned to sort human beings by the color of their skin in under 3 seconds and call it judgment, and that they change the part of themselves that had taught her to, because that was the thing Adaora kept coming back to. The thing that kept her up some nights, even after everything had gone right. Courtney was 26. Somewhere, there had been a Courtney at 22 and 20 and 16 who had not yet learned to do the sorting, and the world had taught it to her, patiently, year by year, in 1,000 small lessons about who got the warm voice and who got the cold one, until it became so automatic she had stopped being able to feel herself doing it. Firing Courtney did not unteach the lesson. It just moved the lesson to whoever sat down at that desk next. The only thing that actually unteaches it is a place that stops rewarding it. And that, the slow structural rewiring of what a building praises and what it punishes, was the only victory Adaora had ever found worth the trouble of winning. It didn't photograph well. It didn't make a satisfying scene in a lobby. But it was the only kind of change that was still there in 10 years. When no one was watching anymore, and the cameras had long since gone home, now I want to talk to you for a second. Because this story is finished. But the part that should keep you up tonight is not, this story is invented. Adaora isn't real. Hargrove Voss isn't a real firm. I made them up. But you already know that the lobby is real. You know that the 2 speeds are real. You know that there are people sitting in waiting rooms right now, this very afternoon, being sorted into nobody by someone who will do it in 3 seconds and never feel a thing, you know that the coffee gets offered to some and not to others. And that the go right up is a door that opens for some bodies and stays shut for others. And that almost none of it ever gets written down. And almost none of it ever costs the person who does it a single thing. And here is the part I need you to sit with. Adaora, good justice. But Adaora had $600 million in her father's portfolio. The reason Bradford Voss lost everything is not that he was cruel. Men are cruel in that lobby every single day and keep their jobs and their gold rings and their clean consciences. He lost everything because on the one day he chose to be cruel. The person he chose it on happened to have the power to make it expensive. That's not justice. That's luck. That's a billionaire's revenge. Think about how many things had to line up. Adaora had to be wealthy, not comfortable, not successful, but generationally wealthy, sitting on a number so large that an entire firm would dismantle itself rather than lose her. She had to be holding that wealth in her hand. On paper, on the exact day she was insulted, there had to be a Priya in the room, willing to risk her career and a recording for the words to be undeniable. There had to be partners above Bradford who valued the money more than they valued him. Pull out any one of those threads. Make her merely a director instead of a billionaire. Take the recording away. Put the slur in a hallway, with no witnesses, instead of a crowded lobby, and the entire story collapses back into the version that plays out 1,000 times a day and ends in silence. The version with no consequences. The version no one ever hears about because there is nothing to hear. Just a woman driving home, carrying it alone. One more time, the woman who sat in that lobby tomorrow. The one Adaora talked about. The one who is just a person. No, 9 zeros. No letter of intent. Nothing in her bag but a resume and her own quiet dignity. She gets walked out. She gets the silence. She gets told it wasn't personal. It was a misunderstanding. You must have had the wrong day. And she carries it home alone. Like millions of people carry it home alone. Because no one with power was in the room. And no one thought to press record. The whole point of Adaora is that she shouldn't have needed to be a billionaire. The coffee and the smile and the go, right up, those should never have been things. You have to be worth $600 million to deserve. They should be the floor. The absolute floor. For Gloria, with her cart, for the woman with nothing in her bag, for everyone who walks through every door, every single time. So let me leave you with the question Adaora left them with. The one that is actually the whole reason I told you this. Bradford Voss could only see her worth when it had a price tag. The question for the rest of us, for everyone watching, for the Priyas of the world who are in the room right now, 20 feet away, with a glass of water in one hand and a choice in the other. The question is whether we can learn to see it without one, before it costs anyone anything, before the tape, before the lawsuit, before the billionaire turns out to be a billionaire. Can you see the worth of a person when there is nothing in it for you to see it? Because that, not the 600 million, not the gold ring, not the perfect devastating withdrawal. That is the only thing that would have actually saved Bradford Voss. And it is the only thing that will save the rest of us. 2. One last thing. And then I will let you go. After Adaora left the lobby that day, after the letter, after the card with 3 words on it, After she walked out the front door of a building they had tried to throw her out of, she did not drive away immediately. She sat in her car in the parking garage for a while. The same kind of garage where Priya had once sat for 40 minutes doing the arithmetic of how much of herself she could afford to give away. The same kind of garage where, somewhere across this country, on this very day, someone with no money and no recording and no name anyone important will ever learn is sitting right now, doing that same arithmetic. Alone, Adaora sat there, with her father's pen in her hand. She did not feel triumphant. People always assume she must have, and she never corrected them, because the truth was harder to explain. What she felt was tired, and underneath the tired, something close to grief, because she knew that for every lobby she could walk into with $600 million, there were 10,000 she would never see, with 10,000 people in them being made to disappear. And she could not be in all of them. And the money that made her powerful in one room was meaningless in the rooms she would never enter. She turned the pen over in her fingers. Build the rooms they cannot keep you out of. Her father had written that to one daughter, on the back of one postcard, with one good pen, at the end of one hard life. And she understood, sitting in that garage, that the instruction had never really been about buildings. It had been about exactly this, about making rooms, real ones, with deed restrictions and oversight roles and names on directories, and one speed instead of two. That the next person wouldn't have to be a billionaire to be allowed inside. That was the only thing the money was good for. That was the whole point of the inheritance. Not revenge. Rooms. Then she started the car, and she drove to the next thing, because there was always a next thing. And the work, as it turned out, felt like breathing. So before you go, let me ask you the question one more time. And this time, I want you to actually answer it down in the comments, where the rest of us can see. Have you ever been the person in the lobby, sorted into nobody, before you finished your own name? Or have you ever been the person 20 feet away, holding the glass of water, deciding whether to look away? Tell me what you did. Tell me what you wish you had done. Because the real question was never whether this happens. The real question is what you do the next time you're standing 20 feet away. If this story moved you, take a second right now to like it, to share it with someone who needs to hear it, and to subscribe. Because stories like this one only travel as far as you carry them. And somewhere out there, there is a person sitting in a lobby right now, waiting to be seen. Be the one who sees them.